Welcome to another episode. What are you reading? What are you writing? I'm your host, Karen E. Osborne, and I am so thrilled to introduce you to my guest today. Welcome to another episode. What are you reading? What are you writing? I'm your host, Karen E. Osborne, and I am so happy to introduce you to Mary Sheriff. She is going to tell us about her book. She's going to tell us about her business. She's going to tell us about her podcasting and blogging, and we're just going to have a wonderful conversation. So stay with us. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She is an author marketing coach, which she tells me is a kind of a new venture, something she's just undertaken for a little while. She's a blogger and a podcaster, and she's a writer. Her novel, Boop and Eve's Road Trip. Don't you love the name of that? And look at that beautiful cover behind her over her shoulder. So cool. And this is about their journey through the heart of Dixie. And it's an unforgettable love story between a grandmother and her granddaughter. Welcome, welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Oh, I'm glad to have you. I did notice on your author page that you have Mary Helen Sheriff. Is that how you prefer to be known?
I can go by either. It just depends on who's talking to me. It seems like the longer someone's known me, the more likely they are to call me Mary Helen.
They link the names together. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I put my E in because it turns out there's other Karen Osbornes out there writing.
Well, there you go.
So I just wondered if it was something like that.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, before you tell us about Boop and Eve, tell us a little bit about your writing journey. How long have you been writing? What got you started?
Sure. So I, as a kid, liked to write, for fun. Creative writing was something I kind of did a little bit on the side. I didn't really think of it as a career choice until later in life. And when I was in graduate school to be a teacher, I discovered children's literature, which I hadn't really read as a kid. I mean, I read picture books, and then I kind of just mostly jumped up to adult books. And kind of didn't read a ton of kids lit. Certainly YA was not even, it was kind of a thing, but not like it is now.
Yeah.
And so as a teacher, I took a class on, teaching children's literature and read all of these fantastic books that I just fell in love with, even though I was, not really the target audience. And at that point, I decided that I wanted to write books for kids and teenagers. And I ended up in the summers while I was teaching, going and getting an MFA in children's literature from Holland's University. And so I wrote a few books that sit on my computer and have never made their way into the world. And so Boop and Eve's Road Trip was the start of my fourth novel. And it was going to be a young adult novel. That was the plan when I started writing it. However, Boop, who is 80, took over half the book. And you cannot have an 80-year-old protagonist in a young adult novel. So Eve is 19. She's, kind of in that young adult world. She's a college freshman, but half of the book is told from her perspective and half is told from Boop's. And so we're calling it women's fiction, but it is a coming of age story. Eve is, coming of age in the traditional sense, but I would argue that Boop is also coming of age. I think coming of age is something we can do over and over and over again.
Yes. And we're never too old. We're never too old to do that. You mentioned before we go deeper into Boop and Eve, you mentioned that you had lots of YA books that you read. You didn't even know that's, and you went to school about it and stuff.
Sure, yeah.
Are there any that stuck out for you? Any that?
Well, there's one I read just recently that I really liked. It's called Girls with Sharp Sticks. And it's set at a boarding school, and the main character is named Philomena, and the school is like raising perfect girls. And in the eerie way I just made that sound, yes, it is. They are perfect in somebody's mind, not mine. But anyway, it's dystopian. It's it has a lot of strong gender statements. And as Philomena starts to realize maybe what's going on behind the scenes and what's behind some of the things she's learning, and the plots twist and it becomes more and more interesting. It's actually part of a series. I only read the first one so far, but I can't wait to read the other two. But that's been my favorite so lately.
So were there any books that you read during when you were getting your MFA, when you were teaching your young people, that influenced Boop and Eve's road trip?
Influenced Boop and Eve's road trip.
In any way, influence the way you write, influence the way you think about characters?
So I think that a lot of my, one of my instructors while I was there is named Han Nolan. She won the National Book Award for her book Dancing on the Edge, but she writes, she's written a lot of books. And I think that often her voice was in my head as I was writing, in, pushing me to go deeper into character, pushing me to not stay away from conflict. I think sometimes you want to be nice to your characters. And so that was kind of, how can you make this worse for them? This needs to be worse. She's just a very beautiful writer, and her books are also Southern, as this one is. So I have to think there was some influence there.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that, because I had a writing instructor who said to me, I know it's hard to believe, because I know you think that you've given her so many obstacles to overcome, but you got to make it tougher for her. So I had the same experience. I'm thinking, really?
This is awful though. This poor girl.
Struggling so much. But then when I think about some of the books that I love, there you go. There's, one disaster after another. So,
right. And I think that disaster sort of required for the character to grow and develop, right? Like it has to be strong enough to force them out of their habits and their comfort zone and that sort of thing.
I think you're exactly right. That's exactly right. And isn't that true in life? That's how we grow. That's how we with challenges. So tell us a little bit more about Boop and Eve.
Okay, so Boop is 80, as I mentioned before, and she's Eve's grandmother. And Boop has a history that is a secret. So you have to get to about halfway through the book before you find out what it is. But she did something a long, long time before that had repercussions going forward. And her daughter doesn't know, and her granddaughter doesn't know, and her sister does, though, and her sister is trying to push her to tell her secret. And Grandma Boop is just kind of debating, like, does this secret being revealed now actually help everyone, or does it make everything worse? And that's sort of her conflict going on, and her dealing with the thing that she did. Like, she kind of pushed it away, and that's how she was able to deal with it. But now, she's having to kind of relive it and decide, I did what I did. I regret it, but these are the reasons I did it. And, how can I move forward while acknowledging it rather than just pretending like it never happened?
Yeah. And what's Eve like?
Eve is a college freshman, and she is the victim of a helicopter mother. And so she's left for college for the first time and doesn't really have great problem solving skills because mom's sort of, bubbled her life.
Of everything.
Yes. And so she's falling apart. And her grandmother lives near the college, which is why mom agreed to let her even go there, because at least grandma was close by. And her grandma catches wind of the fact that something's not right here. And so when Eve comes to her and says, hey, I want to go on a little road trip, can I borrow your car? Boop says, sure, you can borrow my car, but I need to come along with you. And really, Boop wants to go see her sister a little, and she's asked to add that onto the trip. But also, Boop is really trying to figure out what the heck's going on with her granddaughter. and really wants to figure that out before her granddaughter gets home for the summer and her mother sees what's gone on, because her mother, of course, will probably make it worse.
Cool. So this is about their journey and their growth and their change. That sounds awesome. That sounds wonderful.
Thank
You're
you.
also a author. I'm looking at the other side of your other shoulder. You're an author and marketing coach. Tell us about that.
So that's a new thing. And basically the idea is this: I was a teacher, and when I signed my publishing contract, I quickly came to the realization that I didn't really know anything about marketing. And, I mean, yes, I had to market learning to 12-year-olds. That's something, but it's a little different than trying to market a book. So I ended up resigning from my teaching job at the end of the school year and spent the year before my book came out trying to learn everything I possibly could about marketing a book, because this was my lifetime. I've been dreaming about this for 20 some years. And I just felt like I needed to give it every chance I could to be successful. And I happened to sit in a position where I was able to do that. So I'm lucky in that way. But I did spend the year before the book came out learning everything I could about book marketing, and met lots of author friends and heard lots of author friends talk about how they hated marketing. And I'm thinking, I kind of like this. I mean, I wish I had more time to write, yada, yada, but I like it. And I think I discovered that I have a knack for something. And so it just has occurred to me that, there are lots of people out there who help writers write books. They're book coaches, but I'm not familiar with too many people who are helping authors learn to market and guiding them through that process. And so I have a free newsletter that just gives marketing tips each month. And I'm writing a blog called Journeys in Book Marketing that will also have tips in it. And I have a class that's being taught through redpenguinclasses.com on how to launch your book without losing your mind. And that's really about making a marketing plan. And then I do consults, hourly packages, or I do something called a marketing plan audit, where you send me your marketing plan. I spend a ton of time beforehand looking over everything you're doing or planning to do and your platform as it is. And then we meet over Zoom and talk through things. And then I send you like a follow-up proposal written up about everything you could do, should do, shouldn't do, kind of that one-on-one feedback.
That's so cool. That sounds like something all of us out there could use, because so much now lands on the writer. There was a time, I guess there was some time in the fairy tale world of books that the big houses, did all this marketing for you. But even the big houses, unless you are a big writer,
right,
you're still
right,
having to do this stuff on your own. So that sounds so needed. And I know that a lot of my followers everyone's a reader, but there's quite a few authors out there. So guys, here's something for you to consider. Can you share like one or two tips?
Sure. So I think the first thing I would say is to have a plan. I feel like I talk to some authors who are like, ooh, squirrel, shiny thing. Let me go try that. Let me go try that. And it kind of ends up being scattershot. They end up being overwhelmed. They're not able to track any of their results, it's just honestly hard to track results anyway, but they're even less able to do that. And that's partly, I think, why they hate it, is because they're just overwhelmed with trying to figure out what to do next and what everyone else is
working,
doing.
not working. Yeah.
So I think the plan is super huge. And plans change. Of course they do. I made a plan, and then, COVID came before my book came out. So I had to pivot. And yes, that's frustrating. But at the same time, having the plan let me see, okay, this isn't going to work, but this could still work. Or I could look at this piece, and maybe if I changed it this way. So even having a plan when that happened gave me a place to start instead of just looking up and throwing my hands up and saying, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I could look at what I was planning to do and figure out whether I could or couldn't do it, or whether I could modify it.
Yeah.
So even in that situation where everything is just gone nuts, in March of 2020, all plans are messed up, it was still helpful to have a place to start to make a new plan. And then the other thing I think to think about is that most books don't have an expiration date. And so, especially if you're writing novels and fiction, and maybe yours is super trendy, and so maybe it does, but it's still probably not for a few years out, right? So I think sometimes we get caught up in this window of opportunity and thinking, okay, I have like the first 3 months or the first 6 months after my book published. And if I don't sell my book then it's over. And my life
That's
is
what people tell us, though. That's,
right.
That's so much of what you hear, is that you've got to nail down those months leading up and those months after, and then.
Yeah. So I think that's the reason that advice exists is because it used to be that bookstores were the only place to buy books. And so a bookstore is going to get your book in, it's going to let it sit on a shelf for a certain number of months. And then if it doesn't sell them, it's going to mail them back. And at that point, yes, if you haven't sold those books, then you're screwed. But that's not the only place to buy books anymore. And so that time frame is now exponential. You can sell your book 3 years later through an online retailer. With print on demand as an option after you go through your print run, your book can continue to be sold, forever. So to think of it as this short window, I think that can be awfully overwhelming. Now, that window does still matter when it comes to traditional media, because the new release is what the news is.
Yeah,
so if
yeah.
you're trying to get on some of those things in BuzzFeed for the top books coming out this fall and that kind of thing, then that there is a window for that. But that's, not the only way to publicize a book, and it's not the only venue for selling a book. It is one, and it's a good one, and you should take advantage of it, and you should concentrate on that during that window. But some of the other things can have a much longer tail. If you don't figure out how to do an Amazon ad till a year after your book comes out, okay, cool. Like, it doesn't matter. You don't have to do everything all at once.
That's great. That's really great advice. I feel like you're giving me a private consult, and I thank you so much. I hope you guys are gaining a lot from this conversation. So you're also a reader, obviously. You told us all about the things, and you recommended a book, which we appreciate. But do you have any others that you would like to share with our audience?
So another book that I discovered when I was trying to find comp titles, like books that are similar to the one that you've written, I discovered a book and an author that I had never heard of or read before. Her name is Libby Page, and the book is called Mornings with Rosemary. And it's just this delightful, sweet book. It's set in England. And it's a relationship between an 80-year-old named Rosemary and a 20-something, I think she was, named Kate. And Rosemary belongs to a pool, a Lido, they call them, which new word to me, but maybe other people know that. But it's a public pool. She belongs to a public pool. And she just has a whole lifetime of memories at this pool. She met her husband there. She swims there every morning. And, it's just like this, it's part of who she is. And there's discussion about closing this pool. And Kate writes for a local newspaper. And so she is covering the story and meets Rosemary in her, as part of her reporting duties. And the two of them just create this bond together, and they work together to try to save the pool. And I mean, it's just, their relationship is just so sweet and kind. And I just found such joy in reading their book, but it was also very touching and heartfelt too. So I was really thrilled to find this book. And of course you can figure out what why I thought it might be a good comp for me, because we have the old and the young and that kind of thing.
That's a great example. That's terrific. I too wrote a book about an older woman with a younger woman. Tangled Lies, my novel that came out last year, but it's a murder mystery. So it's
Okay.
not tender and sweet. but but my protagonists are a 70-year-old Black woman and a 25-year-old white woman, and
Oh,
how they
wonderful.
team up to solve a murder.
Ooh, oh, we'll have to
Yeah.
catch that.
Are you working on anything now? Are you working on anything
I
at the moment?
am. So I am writing a book about a young woman. It's going to be young adult, and she's lives in a virtual world. There's been a pandemic. They haven't solved it. It's been 30 years. They just all live in their houses and they never go anywhere, and it's all virtual. And there's a crew of people who believe that, well, they've kind of started their own religion, I guess is how I would describe it. They believe that God sent this virus to kill all the sinners. And so they live outside the walls because they think that that's like their test, like as long as I'm a good person, then I'm not going
I'll
to
be
die.
safe.
Yeah. So these two cultures are kind of what's left in the world. And they don't really like each other. Obviously, they have very different feelings about why one should live one way or the other. And a boy from, they call it Eden, a boy from Eden and a girl from the walls fall in love. And so it's their story of dealing with the sort of the differing cultures and the differing ways of looking at things, but also how they're both kind of right and they're both kind of wrong, and and having to deal with that.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. That sounds awesome. Well, I just want to, this has been such a lovely conversation. If our audience wants to find you, they want to find Author Marketing Coach, if they want to find your book, if they just want to follow get your newsletter, where can they find you?
Best place to find me is at maryhelensheriff.com.
maryhelensheriff.com.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank all of you for joining us on this lovely little journey. I hope that you got a lot out of it. I hope that you'll come back next time. But what are you reading? What are you writing?